With that, I certainly want to welcome everybody and thank everybody for coming to the 25th edition of the Celebrate Cowley County History, originally Celebrate Winfield History. I would like to say the 25th consecutive edition, but that wouldn't be quite right because some of you know we did miss one year. There was something, can't remember what, some COVID deal, whatever the hell that was about or something, I don't know. But anyhow, we missed 1 year there. So this is, however, the 25th edition. Starters, would you please be sure and sign in at the table. I'd like to know how many folks are here. It's not to send you new advertising or anything like that. But if you would, put down, if you have an email address, put that down, because that can be helpful. As you all know, we were originally scheduled the last Saturday in January, but because of a little weather issue, we postponed it. Putting out notice of that, it was very helpful for those for whom we had email addresses. Cindy was able to send notice out by email so that you know that way. So if we have special things, if we know your email address, well, we can get information worked to you that way. As I said, this is the 25th edition of the Celebrate Winfield, subsequently became Celebrate Cowley County History program. And I'd like to talk a little bit about, how this all came about being. First of all of you here know, or probably most all of you know, Bob and Mary Hartley. Well, they are native Winfield folks, grew up here. Their family's deeply ingrained into Cowley County history and all that. But due to work, Bob's career in the newspaper business and public service and all that for many years, they obviously lived elsewhere. But they always came home to Winfield. And one of the times when they were back, they had been living in Springfield, Illinois. In fact, Bob and Mary, why don't you start on up here because we're going to need you up here in a minute. Been living in Springfield, Illinois, and encountered a program being conducted there that Bob and Mary thought, Winfield could do something like that, and that would be a good thing to do. So while they were back, Bob mentioned to Phil Jarvis about that, and Phil, not being a historian himself particularly, did think about Roland Mueller, no relation, but Roland, as most all of you remember, was a professor for years and years at St. John's College while it was still in operation. When St. John's closed, Roland was not yet able to retire, so they had to go to California, where he continued teaching for a number of years until he did retire and then moved back to Winfield also. Well, Roland took it on and started putting the program together as we know it today. And but again, it was the idea of Bob and Mary Hartley. And in fact, to make sure that the first time or two actually went, they underwrote all the cost for whatever it was at that time. And so they were responsible really for the program as we know it today. And based on that, Cindy, I think, has something to give to them.
We have a special plaque at the museum that recognizes, and let me read it first and then we'll take a picture. The Cowley County Historical Society History Award presented to those individuals in recognition of their efforts to preserve and document the history of Cowley County. And we have added their name to the bottom of this plaque. It will be hung at the museum. And we also have a thank you for all you have done through the years with a special little setting inside. So thank you very much. But we want a picture of the two of you with the plaque. And you might turn that way too.
While they're doing that, I might also mention, before they moved back to Winfield themselves, after Bob did retire, they always came back for the Celebrate Winfield history programs, except one time. They thinked out one time, Mary said, just because they were both sick and couldn't travel. But since they have been back, of course, they are always here. They have contributed numerous articles and programs themselves, and so are very active. We'll talk about that in a minute too. So, yes. So anyhow, they have been very much responsible for this, and for that we're very appreciative. So thank you, guys. I'd also mention in that regard that 2001 planning committee for this consisted of Roland Mueller was the chair, Jerry Wallace, Dave Seaton, and Joan Cales were the committee that put everything together at that time. It kind of leads us up to the current Cowley County History Committee. Of course, Cindy Gertz is the chair. You know, Gloria Albrecht, sitting back over there, is on it. Gary Lerner, who you'll hear more of here in a little bit. James Sandbolt is our editor, does a lot of work in that regard, and Foss Fire from their Foss over there from our Kansas City. They're all on the committee. I also like to recognize a few other folks today. One thing, Sarah Weinert contributes significantly to this program by putting together the book. It's not a huge deal, but it takes quite a little bit of time to do so, and she contributes that voluntarily to do that each year, and so that's a pretty big aspect of this, and for that we're very appreciative. Also, of course, want to recognize Wanda Waldeck, who showed up this morning, as always, to get the drinks and everything lined out back there, so we certainly appreciate Wanda. I'd like to also mention that Tabitha Hogan from the library is sitting over here, and during the break or whatever will be available to give you some information that's available at the library, and especially for those of you who are aware of the digitized editions of the Winfield Couriers that are now accessible. That by computer, if you're doing some research or whatever, it's really helpful to do that. And you don't know, well, she's got a brochure about that, but she can also walk you through the process for actually getting access to those digitized editions of the Courier, there if you're interested in that. And Kent Melker and his trusty aide, Joe, are over here. If you're interested in the Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War, Ken would be glad to talk to you some more about that. I'd also like to recognize Julie Mignon, who's currently the president of the Cowley County Historical Society, back there at the table with her assistants who have old books, well, the current book, and prior books if you're want to get one. So be sure to stop back to see them get an edition of the current book so you can get the full papers that are going to be summarized this morning and all of that, plus, as say, some additional things from the museum that they do have for sale back there. Which kind of leads up to something I say every year, but still need to repeat. I know you're probably getting tired of hearing this, but distinguishing a little bit of the difference between the Cowley County Historical Museum and the Celebrate Cowley County History program and committee. It's a little hard to distinguish because everybody involved in the Celebrate Cowley County History part is also involved in the museum. But technically, they're two totally separate and distinct entities. The museum pays to prepare the books and then sells the books as a fundraiser for the museum. $15 each, all of that goes to assist the museum. And part of that is because, as you know, our museum is a no-admission museum. It doesn't cost you anything to go in and see it as many times as you want or whatever you want, but they still need funds. The Bryant School building is a neat old building, but it is an old building, which, as I found, is a lot like old human bodies. Now, most of you here are too young to to recognize that issue. But like old human bodies, that old museum building needs a lot of repair and maintenance. It has a lot of just the expense just because it is an old building. As you know, the museum's primary source of funds are memberships. So if you're not already a member, please see the ladies back over there where Julie and Gloria and Jody and Becky all are, and get your membership for this year. However, memberships are not enough to cover everything that needs to be done down there. All the routine things that need to be done. So periodically, they also have to have fundraisers, such as selling the books. That's where the money for the books will go, is to the museum. I'd also just mention the table decorations here today. If you're interested in those, $15, and which is also goes back to the museum, and you can have one of the table decorations. And we have, besides the books, we have other items, as I mentioned, over from the museum to sell and for all that. However, although we do have to have, the museum does have to have fundraisers periodically, they try not to do everything for money. We don't want you getting to think, well, they're in the museum's having something, they're just trying to get some more money. Because they also mix in some freebies throughout the year too, of events and activities around that we put on just for benefit to the community. One of those actually is the Museum Friends programs, the third Monday of every month. And a part of that is this, here on Monday, March the 16th, going to have up at Tabitha's Public Library, a presentation by Larry Hatterberg on the, on Robert Docking, you know, former governor of Kansas, down Arkansas City. The Docking family owned Union State Bank at one time and all of that. So Larry is putting on a program on the Docking, Robert Docking family, because the Hatterberg family and the Docking family were friends. And so Larry is going to do this program up at the museum. Now I need to distinguish, Larry is also doing something in Southwestern here right away. When is that, Cindy?
It's next Tuesday with Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah, next Tuesday regarding Eleanor Roosevelt. That's a totally separate, distinct deal from this. This deal with the library is entirely free, and will be a program there at 4:30, so certainly would invite you to come hear Larry talk about the Docking family at that time. Well, as I was talking about the distinction between the museum and the Celebrate Cowley County History stuff, leads up to one other little thing. The little baskets on each table. That being because these are distinct, the Celebrate Cowley County History Committee funds this program totally and separately from the museum. That's why we're asking for contributions. It doesn't cost us a lot to put this program on, but it does cost something. We have to pay the city for the use of the building, for providing the drinks. The cookies are done by volunteers, but we do a couple of ads and so we have several $100s each year in expenses just to put on today's program. And that's why we would certainly appreciate any contributions that you might want to leave there to help us actually put on today's program. And in the past, you all have been very, very generous in helping us to do that. We certainly do appreciate it. Today's program, as you know, we've got, we're going to have 2 presentations at the start, and then we'll take a break, which time we'll get some drinks and cookies, visit Tabitha, go back and see what, buy a book if you don't already have one, go back and see whatever else from the museum that you might be interested in getting. And then we will have our final presentation. And then after that, we'll bring all the presenters up and you can ask questions of any of them that you might have at that time. So that being, our first presenter is somebody that virtually everybody here knows. And so don't really need to introduce her, although I do need her to stand up and start up here. Because it's a marvelous lady that's been here for a few years, and is not only just a good historian, but you read here, she is a really good writer. And it's really appropriate that she might be giving a presentation today, because at the first Cowley Celebrate Winfield History program in 2001, Sharon also gave a presentation at that time on a relatively similar program or a presentation. But we're certainly welcome to have Sharon Taylor here to give her presentation this morning.
It's nice to be here today and to see all your shining faces. I just remember 25 years ago, I think I remember 25 years ago, and how nervous I was then. I'm exactly that same nervous today. It doesn't change hardly at all. As a matter of fact, when I was in my master's program, I had to do a 3-minute teach for a class. And I thought about it for a long time, decided I would do 3 minutes of nursing history, because I like history. So I went in front of this class of not too many people, thank goodness. And I started out by saying, "Good morning, I'm going to talk about history today, nursing history, and I think you all remember Florence Henderson." Quick as I am, I said, "Well, she was a nice lady and probably named for our wonderful Florence Nightingale." Just remember, if I can't say a word, you can help me. Where's the clicker?
It's underneath. On the shelf.
Found it. I haven't practiced with this, so. But that's me. I wanted to start out by saying that nursing, the finest art, was a coined phrase from Florence Nightingale. I can't see what it says up there, so. That nursing is as old as time. I suspect that if you went to the cave dwellers and looked at the walls, you would find somebody doing some kind of care for someone else. And so nursing has always been something that has been around. The picture is of men who were crusaders, and they were some of the male nurses that were first recognized. It's a blend of charity and of healing because of the role of the church played in modern nursing. It reflects values, the values that we share in how we take care of others. And it has been slow, as many things are, to work on, to recognize the scientific side of nursing. Okay. We have here a picture of, well, I guess I could say that we've come on down now from the cave dwellings down to Crimean War, or a little bit before that. In the literature, you'll read in Dickens' work about Sarah Gamp and Betsy Prigg. They were the nurses that Dickens wrote about. The nurses in England at that time were women, generally, so I suppose it could be men as well. But they kind of came into the house and did whatever you wanted, or you tried to get them to do whatever you wanted. They really enjoyed drinking the patient's medicine. It was alcohol-based. They liked the food, and they did very little else to take care of someone, mostly themselves. But in England and in other parts of the world too, there were people who really did want to do some kind of care and nursing. And Florence Nightingale, the other picture is of her. She went to school in Germany at Kaiserwerth. She lived in a convent for a while and worked with people that way. She, at her family's chagrin, I guess you could say, she became a nurse and decided to do the work of nursing. And then, of course, the Crimean and all of that, that was just before the Civil War. When she came back from the Crimean, though, there were a couple of things she wanted to do. And one was to reform the Army sanitary practices. And she also wanted to develop a nursing school. And she did that at St. Thomas Hospital in England. Okay, every school teacher has to give a quiz. Whoops, wrong way. Gary, I think this might be better if you do
I think
it.
you're pressing the wrong button. The down arrow. There you go.
Okay. So I have a quiz for you. When did the first settlers come to Cowley County? Anybody know?
1860s. 1869. 62. 1868.
Yeah, 66 is what I found. Probably before that and after that too, but and then who was left behind? All the women and children were left behind because they were afraid of the Indians. So eventually, to rectify that, there was a deal made with Chief Chitopa, and he said that he would not hurt any of the women and children if they paid $5 a head for them to come into Cowley County. And so that's how we got the women and children here. They decided to get that it was safe. And then by the late 1800s, there were 2,000 people in Winfield. Folks came for free land. Oh, goodness. They came for free land. And I thought it was interesting. They came for, also, I guess you could say they came where they could have everything ruined by grasshoppers and fires and all sorts of things. And then they lived through all these horrible contagious diseases. But by 1880, we were beginning to be able to do something about the diseases. Germ theory was something that people were beginning to take seriously. And although Florence Nightingale never believed in germ theory, she did do everything right in that she insisted that everyone should have good food, they should be clean, they should have fresh air. And when she was working in the Crimean, it reduced the 60% death rate down to 1%. Amazing, just by opening up the windows, washing the bed linen and the people, and feeding them properly. it was in Winfield, the land that the state hospital is on, or the prison now, was set aside for, don't you love that name? The Kansas State Imbecilic Asylum for Idiotic Youth. I don't hear a groan or anything. But, and it had a teacher, H.H. Green, and his wife was the matron. But he stepped aside, and eventually, and Dr. Pilcher became the superintendent there. Dr. Pilcher had been in the Civil War as a young man. He was about 17 when he was when he went to war, and worked for a doctor, and he really liked that kind of work. And so when the Civil War was over, he went to medical school and came west, and he stayed here in Kansas, in Winfield. And he began doing some interesting surgery at the state school. It seems that there was a lot of issue about the sexual practices of the mentally retarded. And so in order to take care of that, he had this cure that was called Pilcherization. And I talked about that in the first presentation I did 25 years ago. It still is startling, but it was to remove the ovaries and to unsex all of the men. And so it was a surgery that was finally found out about by the people in Winfield, and he was fired. But it was not a procedure that, it was a procedure that many people across the United States, and eventually in the whole of Europe at least, became quite interested in. And he was reinstated then in 1899, and that continued on. Probably in order to do surgeries that he did, he was training people, particularly women, who were working out there to work with him and to be, quote, nurses. A very training type of education. I'm sorry, this slide is up. I think that's him doing surgery. Because when he retired then, and went into private practice in 1899, he started a hospital, and the hospital is at, is it Meaner, Maine Meaner? And on 10th and Meaner.
10th and Manning.
Manning, 10th and Manning. I get them all confused. And so he had a surgical hospital there. And at the same time, the Winfield Hospital was built. And the Winfield Hospital was, I think, across the street and down from the Village East, where St. Mary's Hospital was. And it was the first hospital in Winfield. And it had a training school. the year after it opened. So there were 2 hospitals in those years. Dr. Pilcher died in 1908, and the hospital was taken over by a few doctors here in town, and they renamed it Winfield Hospital. And about the same time, the Winfield Hospital #1 was given to or sold to the Sisters of St. Joseph and became St. Mary's. Now, this hospital that was being built, the first Winfield Hospital, was a not-for-profit hospital. And I can imagine that those doctors felt like they were really being taken by not having a for-profit hospital. Shame on me. But anyway, they decided that it was not worthwhile, and they gave it to the Sisters of St. Joseph, who ran it as St. Mary's Hospital until it closed. And it had a nurses' training school. And nursing schools at that time were simply a hospital with a matron who did a little bit of teaching, and then anything having to do with medicine or taking care of folks came from the doctors who would do lessons, lectures to the nurses whenever they decided that they needed to have some kind of a lecture. It was very informal, and they worked at the hospital as well. So when someone who was going to nursing school actually had a job, they got $4 a month. They got their room and board, and they went to work all hours, all shifts at the hospital, and did their studies besides. This is I need to move this one. Their jobs included all of these things: to keep the rooms clean, to change the bed linen and the body linen, and to apply dressings, administer enemas and catheters, observe temperature, pulse, respirations, and all those kind of things, and to prevent diseases, and to take care of the patients before they had surgery and after they had surgery, and to take care of the obstetrical patients. Most of the obstetrical patients were probably sicker than than the average woman who was having a child, because they were born at home for the most part. And nursing in contagious diseases and preparation of food. And the nurses were not expected to get out of school and start working at the hospital. They were expected to get out of school and go to work for private homes. There would just be a few who would work in a hospital. This is a picture of a nurse being trained. It was a medical student's concept of a nurse being trained. He also said that any nurse or woman that read a medical text or anything else about medicines, that to learn anything was not worth her salt. So didn't need to know anything to be a nurse, I guess. Students were men and women, 20 to 30. They had to be single, by the way. At least the women did. There needed to be trustworthy evidence of good morals and education and health status. And then they got $100 when they graduated and a diploma, and they could go look for a job. This is a picture of St. Mary's Hospital, which was a not-for-profit, had a nurses training school, and the school lasted until 1951. When I went to nursing school, first I went to St. Joseph Hospital in Wichita, and there I met Sister Valeria. Sister Valeria was a nurse here at St. Mary's at one time, and she wanted to tell us a story, and she had us all in a nursing class one day, and she came in, a little frail woman. Sally, do you remember Sister Valeria? She wanted to tell us about Winfield's first IV, or intravenous, she said. And so she said the Snyder boys had come home from school. Well, that would be Cecil and Howard Snyder. They'd come home from Philadelphia. They went to school there. And they had with them a box, a little box. And they were going around and showing it to all the nurses and nursing students. And it was a syringe, and a syringe was what we call a Loralock. It had a little port on the side of it that you could put a hose on, and then it would put the medicine through the syringe and the needle into whatever you put the needle into. So they were very, very excited about this. And pretty soon, the nurses were excited about it too. Pretty soon there was a man that came in, and he was diagnosed with a hernia, and they were going to have to do surgery for him. And so they were going to use the intravenous for the first time. Well, you know, when I went to work and I wanted to do an intravenous, I put the needle in. I found a bag of normal saline or whatever they wanted them to have. I put the medicine in it, and it was done. Well, in those days, it was not that simple. She said we had to take a beaker of water and put it on the stove with a certain number of tablets. She said, I think it was 8 or 10 tablets that went into the water. And the water had to bubble at exactly the right speed so that the normal saline would be it would be normal saline. Otherwise, it would be too salty or too unsalty. So they did all that. They wrapped the syringe and boiled it on the stove. They boiled a hose on the stove. All of that. Then it had to cool. You know, I think the guy could die before that. They had to cool it all down. They brought him down to surgery, and the nurse couldn't put the needle into the arm of the patient. The doctor had to do it. And so they put the IV in, and it was controlled by a thumb screw on the hose that was attached to the needle or the syringe and the bottle. They hung it up. Doctor did the surgery. All was well. He lived. But he had to have that IV for 3 days. And when someone comes out from under ether, they're a little rowdy and toss themselves about a little bit. And the only place that they thought to put it in was in the anacubical space in the arm. And they knew that it would come out. And so Sister Valeria said we had to figure out what to do. And we did. She said, we sat by his bed, taking turns for 3 days, and held his arm so that the needle would stay in. And she said, we counted it a privilege. And I've always remembered that story and counting it a privilege. Because nursing education and what it's done for me, and I hope for others, has been a privilege, let me tell you. This is a picture of the bottom of Pilcher's place. It turned in the hospital number 2. And it was for profit. And it also had a training school. In 1927, we opened William Newton Hospital. It was the next year they started the nursing school there. And Dina Grimwald was the director of the school. And they had a full-time teacher hired. It was just one teacher. There were 2 options. You could study so many hours at Southwestern and then go on to nursing school, and you could graduate with a diploma in nursing and a degree, a Bachelor of Arts from Southwestern. And then the 3-year program, which was just the diploma that you would do at the school of nursing. And again, the instructors was the one lady, and then they used physicians for the rest of the curriculum. The criteria, 18 to 36, and with a high school education would get you in nursing school. And then along came World War II, and there was an act, I think it's called the Bolton Act, that funded the cadet nursing program. And that happened at Willie Newton. We could enroll there for this. It was totally paid for by the government. It was to take care of people that were overseas, soldiers and all, and also supply nurses for the population, the general population here in the States. That program ended in 1948. And it ended like, it's over. So people who were halfway through, and they had to figure out how they were going to get the rest of the education. Of course, Willie Newton started back with their program then at that time. When you call it Willie Newton, you know you've been there a while. This is Virginia Hall, where the nurses lived, and it also had all the equipment for doing the preliminary work and learning to make beds and all that sort of thing. In 1948, you could not be married and go to school. My mother wanted to be a nurse. She also wanted to marry my dad. She married my dad and didn't go to school until she was 50. And then by 1950, they were talking about, it all depended. They would evaluate you and decide whether you could go to nursing school or not. The rules for nurses training are very interesting. There were rules about everything. It was very, they were very protective of these young women, usually young women who came to school. They had to be in at a certain time. They had to be at work at a certain time, of course. They had to wear certain clothes. And they had to have their shoes polished a certain way. And there were, you know, I've heard many, many stories about that. One of them, if you are ever in Virginia Hall, there's a parlor, and then the rest of the school over here. Stairway goes up on each side, and there's a landing, and then you can go on up to the upstairs. After chapel, the girls were to come up those steps, show their girdle, and then they could go. I also read about a girl that was 15 minutes late coming in at night, and so they had reprimanded her and had notified her parents, and she had some kind of penance to pay. I'm not sure what. So, what's the difference in, I think we want to talk about something else first before that. Well, St. John's College then, after William Newton closed its program, which was closed because of the notion that nurses, the powers that be where nursing is concerned, had decided that they needed to have master's prepared people to teach nursing. And that was just more than the administrator of the hospital thought was necessary. And for all other reasons that I have no idea, they decided to close Newton Hospital School of Nursing. And about 11 years later, St. John's opened a program, and it was an associate's degree program, but they would sit for the regular RN exam and be registered nurses. The hospital gave St. John's the Virginia Hall and all the equipment that was in it, and for $1 a year rent. And so we went on with some nursing program there. I went to St. John's at that time, thought I was going to go to the program, and decided not. Went on to St. Joseph in Wichita. But when I came back after I had finished my diploma at St. Joseph in Wichita, I worked for a while in the hospital, and then I went to work at St. John's because I had a bachelor's degree and I was able to teach in a school that had a degree lower than the one that I had. You had to have, teachers had to have a degree higher, excuse me, than the people that they were teaching were trying to acquire. So I went to school and I went to work there. Some of the traditions of training schools were continued on at St. John's. They were ORCAPs. Now people who are going to schools generally don't have CAP, bachelor's program to go with that four-year degree. The school decided to close before it really happened. And so the nursing program was taken over by Southwestern. And Southwestern continued in, I think it was 23 years, 27 years of education of nurses at Southwestern. And then that program closed. So we were out of nurses then from 2013 until this year. This year, Southwestern College has developed a new program, and these are Southwestern students that are preparing to be nurses at this time. So the tradition carries on as far as nursing is concerned. Nursing is a profession that comes and goes as far as needing nurses, and then they say they don't need nurses, and then they need nurses again, and then they don't need nurses again. And so it's kind of where you are when, particularly in small places, that you will have a nursing school available or not. When I reflect on this, I can see that nursing has been paternalistic, I guess I can say, and in protecting the women until they got to be nursing education, and now they're just plain students like everybody else. It was an exploration. It was they used women to do work in the hospitals, exploited women and the nurses to do work in the hospitals. It was pretty cheap and cheerful though. It really is based on economic issues and what's going on in the world. As far as the hospitals and schools of nurses coming and going. It is an altruistic obligation to care. Nurses have an altruistic obligation to care. We need to do that. It's in our blood, I think. And then when I think about myself and nursing, I think about the nurses that have gone before me, the ones that I can name. Anna Mae Wilcox, Sally. There were many nurses. We all call them by their last name, so they don't come to me really fast, but Nancy Bender, Frida Holt, all of these women and many more were the people that I worked with and loved and cared about, along with the patients. And with those other people, Sister Valeria, the teachers that I had in school, the people that I remember from reading the books and learning about the history of nurses, and remember that it's a privilege to be a nurse. How many nurses do we have in the audience today? Stand up so I can see you. Sally! Are there any new SIP nursing students? Okay. Well, I'm sorry. But I'm very proud to have been a nurse. I'm retired, and it's really hard to give it up. It taught me about you, but it taught me mostly about me. It's a wonderful education, whether it's a training school or a master's in nursing or a doctorate in nursing or master's or whatever you want. It's a privilege to be a nurse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. While our next presenter is working his way up here, I want to point out in your book that in addition to the 3 papers that are being presented, we also have 2 additional that's in here. They're shorter papers that are written for which you'll have no oral presentations, one of which is done by Mary Hartley, believe it or not, again. And it's her Memories of Island Park. Very interesting reading of some family memories and recollections of there. That's one of them. One of the other shorter papers is a little paper by Becky Reed, as many of you know from Cowley County Extension, and it just talks about the development of Cowley County Extension. As most all of you are aware, the Extension Service is a cooperative venture from Kansas State University and the county. Started off originally kind of an agricultural related things, solely, especially a lot of you more mature people here may remember Charlie Smith was the Cowley County Ag agent for years and years and years here. But the extension then kind of developed on into other things beyond just the agriculture. 4-H, family and consumer sciences and all that. But Becky has written a short article here about that. Our next presenter is our local nerd here for computers. Y'all are very familiar with. I know Gary has previously done papers here before besides helping run the video and all that today. Anyhow, Gary Lerner is going to be here today to tell us how our Kansas City could have become the air capital of Kansas.
Thank you. Okay, let's imagine a clear spring day in Ark City, and the citizens hear a sound they don't recognize because they've never seen such a machine that's causing the commotion. It's coming from a machine that's unlike anything they've seen. And it appears over town at about 70 miles an hour. It's a Mosant monoplane powered by a 7-cylinder, 50 horsepower rotary engine. It circles, the pilot picks a landing spot, and it touches down at the fairgrounds in the southeast part of town. Sounds good, but that's not the way it happened. The truth about Ark City's actual first encounter with a powered plane is pretty interesting, though. Ark City's aviation story in the early 20th century isn't just about the first airplane. It's about ambition, improvisation, civic boosters, airmail routes, barnstorming, and 2 tragedies that erased years of momentum overnight. So this morning we're going to walk through how Ark City tried, early and repeatedly, to become an aviation center, why it almost worked, and a little about what pushed that dream elsewhere. So let's start with the first powered flight that Ark City witnessed. And the plan to have that plane arrive dramatically through the air like I just described Kansas weather spoiled that plan. On Saturday evening, May 11, 1912, the 645 Kansas Southwestern Railway train arrived from Caldwell, pulling something a little extraordinary. A partially disassembled Mossant monoplane. This was in a special rail car that also served as the Mossant International Flying School's mobile repair shop and spare parts inventory. High winds, and by high winds we don't know, could have been 10, 15 miles an hour. These were fragile machines. Prevented the planned flying arrival from Caldwell, where that company had just completed an air exhibition engagement. And Arch City was next on their trip schedule. And one of the details that makes history seem real, after arrival, that state-of-the-art airplane was hauled from the rail car to the fairgrounds with a horse-driven, horse-pulled hay rack. The pilot traveling with this contingent was one J. Hector Worden. And now it won't work for me. There he is. This man was Cherokee descent and described as one of, if not possibly, the first Native American to learn to fly. And his story is bigger than just this tour. For instance, he was one of the first pilots ever to fly in combat. He served with the Mexican government during the Mexican Revolution in 1910 and 11 on reconnaissance and bombing missions, and for which he was reportedly paid $1,500 a month, which is quite a sum in 1910. Another small world detail about Mr. Worden was that while he was in Arch City, he visited with an old friend by the name of Edgar Miller, who was a training instructor at Chilocco. Mr. Miller had been an instructor at the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania while J. Hector Worden was attending there as a student. Anyway, this aviation visit wasn't just a casual drop-in. Worden and the Mossant Company had been contracted by the Chamber, or actually by the Arch City Commercial Club at that time, for a multi-day exhibition that included, by contract, at least 3 exhibition flights. And we even know the business terms. Mossant was to receive a flat fee of $300 plus a percentage of the admission proceeds. And spectators had to pay 50 cents to get on the fairgrounds. By the way, that fairground had a wooden fence all the way around it. You didn't just walk on. There were gates. They paid 50 cents to enter, and if they wanted to visit the tent where the airplane was stored and they gave lectures on airplanes, they had to pay another 15 cents. The airplane itself was called a Mossant monoplane and built in a Mossant facility in New York, but it was actually a copy of the French Blériot 11, which was the design that first flew the English Channel. The only difference was the Mossant plane had a 50 horsepower engine, whereas the original Blériot flew with a 35 horsepower engine. Anyway, despite weather delays, the wind of course, Worden completed contracted flights from the fairgrounds and thrilled spectators both on and of course off the fairgrounds. One reporter in the Traveler marveled that, quote, every action of the machine and the Birdman was perfect. And I find that interesting because I doubt that guy had ever seen an airplane fly before. Anyway, another detail that makes aviation feel a little less romantic and a lot more like reality, on the last flight at the fairgrounds, plane ran into a haystack. Of course, that was due to the fact that these planes had nothing that even resembled wheel brakes on them. In fact, they didn't have a steerable tail wheel. They were a little crude. Okay, I want to make a couple of points before we move on with this history. In the interest of county-wide perspective, Winfield actually had a visitor before Ark City, and I know that's going to make some of you happy. But Alvin Longred from Topeka flew a plane of his own design here in Winfield in a similar exhibition a few months earlier in November of 1911. And while we're on the subject of dates, the other thing I'd like to address is that there's a lot of documentation out there, unofficial, that says that Ark City exhibition took place in 1910. And I don't know where that date came from, but I did a lot of searches of traveler archives, and there just weren't any airplanes in Ark City in 1910 or 11, or even earlier. I'm personally convinced that 1912 was in fact the first time, certainly, that the Traveler reported anything about an airplane visiting the city. Anyway, from 1912, for a few years, aviation in the city and in the county is not routine. It's more of a novelty at that point. But just after World War II ends, on December 21st, 1918, a couple of U.S. Army Curtiss JN-4 training biplanes from Richfield in Waco, Texas, arrived in Ark City. They landed at about 5 o'clock after a full day's flight from Waco. They circled for 15 or 20 minutes in kind of an exhibition and then landed. One of them landed just north of the north end of what was then the north end of Summit Street. It's in the northeast quadrant of Summit and Kansas Avenue. A.A. Newman owned an alfalfa field there, and that's where that plane landed. The other plane, for whatever reason, I guess because this was sort of an exploratory trip, landed on the McGee farm east of town. I was unable to figure out exactly where that was, but I assumed it was somewhere on the other side of the river. Anyway, the aviators praised that alfalfa field as one of the finest landing fields they used on that trip. The military men that were involved in this were Lieutenants B.R. Jacoby, J.H. Smith, and E.H. Ball, and a mechanic by the name of Walter Hines, who was a sergeant. They were hosted at the Fifth Avenue Hotel. And it was reported that Sergeant Hines even delivered a personal letter from a soldier at Richfield to that soldier's mother in Ark City. This is a map, more or less, of their flying route. The planes flew about 75 to 80 miles per hour. They traveled 400 miles. And made Oklahoma City to Arkansas City in an hour and a half. You can just about do that with a car these days. You might have to cheat a little if viewers not watching. Crowds gathered, guards were assigned overnight, and a key local figure appeared. His name was Wilbur Pete Hill. He was an experienced local aviator, and he took care of the maintenance needs of the airplanes and supervised the guard detail. And as a thank you, the Army visitors gave him a thrill ride the next day. And that next day, the airmen departed for Fredonia. Their journey was part of a War Department initiative to map aerial routes and collect data on weather and landing fields for future airmail service. And their map route included Dallas, Ardmore, Oklahoma City, Guthrie, Park City, and Fredonia. I'm not sure why Fredonia was the terminus for this flight. I mean, this is a town of like 3,000 people at that time, so, but I suspect they had Army buddies there, would be my best guess. Anyway, by 1918, we can say that our city was not just watching aviation develop, but was getting involved. As the 1920s approached, a pair of local aviators by the name of Eric Williams and Pete Hill, again, decided to try and establish an airport north of that alfalfa field. Their grass strip was on top of the hill about a half a mile north of Kansas Avenue, roughly where the United Methodist Church is today. This is a bit of a eye chart, but I've kind of superimposed a fake runway on top of what is a 1970 aerial photo. And their hangar that we haven't built yet, but we'll get into here in a minute, was located just about where the Hillcrest Bible Baptist Church is today. That runway is simply representative. That was just one big flat grassy hilltop. There was no real runway there. It was just a grass strip. Keep in mind, these planes could take off and land in 300 to 500 feet, so they didn't need a big long runway like they do today. And at this point, we're going to introduce another pilot to the Park City aviation scene. He was an ex-Army pilot by the name of Walter Beach, who would later found Beach Aircraft and obviously become quite famous. But this dream that's taking place needed infrastructure, especially hangar space. So to that end, Williams and Hill went to the Chamber of Commerce with plans for a large hangar. And the Chamber appropriated $500 towards the hangar construction. And the financing and construction details are a little fascinating. For starters, the lumber that would be used for this large hangar, and it was about a 10-ship hangar, which was outsized for that day and age. The lumber for that project came from a stock of lumber that had been purchased at well over $1,000 to build a grandstand for a semi-pro baseball team that did not materialize. They also approached the Carpenters Union, and they agreed to donate the labor to put the hangar together. So it was quite a civic effort. And aviation wasn't just happening out there on the airfields. In town, the George Hill Motor Company, or garage, which was located in the basement of what people of a certain age like me would call B.A. Tubbs Motors, at 502, 504 North or South Summit. They were located in the basement of that building and advertised themselves as the only airplane engine repair shop in the Southwest, emphasizing in one of their ads that life depends on the engine. You can't argue with that. One of the Hill in that Hill garage was in fact Pete Hill's brother, who he had lured here from, I think, Springfield, where he had been running a garage previously. Meanwhile, they also had a a little competition down south of town. There was a strip operated by Cecil Lucas and Roy Hume. Both these firms, the Roy Hume and Lucas outfit, as well as Williams Hill, bought and sold airplanes. They maintained them, provided flying lessons, and they also, in both cases, teamed up with stunt performers like wing walkers and parachutes to make a little money all over the Midwest. Because barnstorming and air tricks were becoming quite popular. It should also be noted at this point that oil men in the Kansas and Oklahoma area were a big factor in the success of these small aircraft outfits. In any case, this hangar that we put together with volunteer labor and $500 was finished in the spring of 1921, and they had a grand opening. It was kind of a week-long celebration, and on April 6th, they even had an illuminated night exhibition flight by Eric Williams and a boxing match in the hangar. So they kind of covered it all. The tone was celebratory in nature, and Arch City is at least hoping to step boldly into the booming aviation business. 2 weeks later, actually 10 days later, that hangar burned to the ground. On the night of April 16th of 1921, 4 farm kids coming back too late from Winfield spotted the fire and got to Arch City as fast as they could to alert the fire department. But of course, that was way outside the infrastructure of the city at that time, so there was no water. So it spread rapidly. At one point, and I believe this was reported by either one of the firemen or across the street, across what is now US 77, was a refinery. And that night watchman reported the fire as well because he actually had a phone. But in any case, someone in the process of reporting his fire said that the dope that they used to stiffen the fabric on these old airplanes, which is highly, highly flammable, exploded. There were barrels of it in that hangar, and it just literally lit up the whole hillside. There was no hope. So it was a total loss, including 7 airplanes, one of which was a brand new de Havilland biplane that was still in the crate. It hadn't even been assembled yet. So it's a devastating financial loss, estimated at more than $50,000, which is the better part of $1 million in today's bucks. And the insurance part of this is a real nightmare. They thought they were covered. The insurance companies thought otherwise. Apparently they had shopped insurance through an agent in town around a lot of companies, and most companies didn't want to touch airplanes or hangars or anything to do with them. So many of those applications were just thrown in the trash, I think, when they were received at the insurance firms. But in any case, eventually Williams Hill sued no less than 27 insurance companies right here at the Cowley County Courthouse, and it was years before they actually received any proceeds at all, and then it was only a fraction of what they thought they were insured for. So that's kind of a what-if moment in the Arch City aviation story, because if that hadn't burned, I think things would have been a whole lot different. It burned momentum, is what happened. So with very little cash left, if any, Winfield approached the Chamber of Commerce again and begging for money. We need to rebuild our hangar. And despite the fact that there was some favorable comments around town and a favorable editorial in the paper at that time to help those boys out, it didn't happen. So they eventually built a new hangar, but it was just like a 1 or 2 ship hangar and workshop, nothing that even approached that 10 ship hangar that they had just burned to the ground. Given the prospect of a much reduced chance of success at the top of that hill, Mr. Beach left. He ended up finding employment with Laird Aircraft in Wichita as their test pilot. He didn't burn any bridges with his Ark City friends, though, and continued to stay in contact. A couple of years later, by late 1923, the Chamber has decided, maybe we need to get back in this business. So they leased a 134-acre there it goes. A 134-acre piece of land south of town. And it became the basis for a new municipal airport. The impetus for all this was an offer from the Lincoln Standard Aircraft Corporation in Lincoln, Nebraska. And the offer was communicated by none other than Pete Hill, who was now working for Lincoln Standard. And the proposal was that if Ark City would build an airfield with a 10-ship hangar, they being Lincoln Standard, would establish a distribution branch there with a repair shop, a flying school, spare parts warehouse, and would potentially employ 200 people. So in November of 23, the Chamber purchased a 10-ship government hangar from the U.S. Army Air Services, Ellington Field near Houston. That hangar was disassembled, marked for reassembly, labeled, and shipped by rail to Ark City. The hangar with shipping only cost $900. $1,100 was the estimated reconstruction cost. So for $2,000, they had a state-of-the-art hangar again. The government sold literally hundreds of these hangars. They had built hundreds of them while they were training pilots for World War I, but they decided to replace all of them with steel hangars for reasons we all know already. The steel hangars, of course, being less susceptible to fire. Ellington Field alone had 35 of these that they sold at $500 a piece. So even though the field was built on a Lincoln Standard Company offer, the first planes to land there were from a competitor called Swallow Aircraft. Walter Beach was working for them, and at some point, Swallow made an offer to the city to establish a sales branch at the new airfield. But when Ray Page, who was the president of Lincoln Standard, heard about this, he said, "Nah, if they show up, Lincoln Standard's out of here. That's not the way this is supposed to work." So Swallow did not establish a sales office there. This is that government hangar that was built and finished in 1924. And in 1924, Lincoln Standard had in fact inked the lease on that field. And they had a grand opening air event early in November that drew enormous crowds. The Traveler reported 3,000 cars and 10,000 spectators, but yeah, okay. But if there were half that many people there, that's still quite a crowd. Then in early 25, Ray Page, the president of Lincoln Standard, fell seriously ill. And I wasn't able to tell for sure, but I think that precipitated the pullback of Lincoln Standard from the Ark City Municipal Airfield, because they let the lease run out at the end of the year and pulled back. So in January of 26, a local guy by the name of Lee Lawson, lived out west of town and was actually a professional wheat thresher. One of those guys that back in that day hauled his threshing machine around all the farms and threshed wheat. He took over the lease of the field south of town. And by the way, we're talking about the location of, that's Haynes Field. For those of you about my age, that field closed, I think, in the very early 70s. But it's just east of IXL School, across the railroad tracks, east on the IXL Road. It was the same location from the 1923 hangar build until it closed in, like I say, in the early 70s. So this is the hangar. And we think that picture was taken the day of the grand opening down there on November 8th and 9th of 24. There's a plane in that picture in the foreground that's kind of important. It's one of one. It was called the Swallow Special or Swallow Racer. And guess who's flying it? None other than Walter Beach. Laird Aircraft eventually became Swallow Aircraft, and when they started building the new Swallow biplane, they chopped the wings down and made a racer out of one of their Swallow biplanes, put an extra fuel tank on it, put fairings on the landing struts, and Walter Beach won a lot of races with that all over the U.S. There's only one other known picture of that airplane. If anybody here knows where that picture, the original or an original, is located, I dearly love. We have a copy that this is scanned from at the museum that just had a note on it at one time that said Ark City Hangar, and that was it. Originally, I thought it was the hangar on top of the hill, the Williams Hill hangar, but it turns out that plane wasn't built till 1923, so we know it's the south field and the military hangar. So Lawson takes over the lease. His operation is pretty well equipped, and he establishes a pretty sizable flying school. In fact, in 1927, the Traveler reported, just offhand, I guess, that there were 11 students enrolled down there. So there were planes flying pretty much all the time. Meanwhile, Ark City did not end up a stop on those coveted airmail routes, probably because profitable routes, as it turned out, obviously, were going to be servicing larger population areas. And with Wichita only about 60 miles away, there was no practical need for the airmail planes to stop in Ark City. But still, that airport does become a real aviation hub locally. And in fact, in 1927, thanks to that oversized hangar, there was an encounter with national aviation history. In August of that year, a man by the name of Art Goebel won a Trans-Pacific air race from San Francisco to Honolulu. His plane was called the Wool Rock. It was a Travel Air Model 5000 monoplane that was backed by Frank Phillips of Phillips Petroleum. After that race, they wanted to store the airplane for a period, and there just weren't that many big hangars around that could hold it or had space for it. So it ended up stored, I think, for about 2 years in the hangar in Ark City, along with another Travel Air 5000 that was in that same race that was called the Oklahoma. Both those Travel Airs ended up stored down at the Lawson hangar. By the way, that race that Wool Rock, number one, Wool Rock is now hanging at Wool Rock Museum. I'm sure many of you have seen it. But in any case, the top picture shows the Wool Rock being prepped for that race, and that was a tragic event. Something like 2 or 3 airplanes, when they took off from San Francisco, didn't make it further than the end of the runway because they were loaded with so much fuel. They crashed. 3 of the 5 that actually got out over the ocean never made it to Honolulu, and no one was ever recovered from those planes. They were never found, not even the wreckage. Okay, back to Ark City. In 1928, Lawson actually bought the hangar that he had been leasing from the chamber. This gave him complete control over the airport and the hangar, and the provision was, of course, that he would operate it as a municipal airport, allowing anybody that wanted to land there to land to get service. History repeats. By about 3 in the morning on July 6, 1930, the Lawson hangar burns to the ground. 3 boys returning from Ponca. There's a lot of guys running around late night. I never did that. 3 boys returning from Ponca City noticed a bright light in the hangars they drove by. And they thought, well, somebody's working late, so they didn't think anything about it. Well, it turned out, of course, that was not just a bright light. It was on fire. The fire destroyed the hangar and everything in it, obviously. Along with an adjacent cabin that Lawson and his chief mechanic, Mr. J.P. Johnson, lived in. Mr. Johnson was asleep in that cabin and woke up to exploding gasoline drums at about 2:40 or 2:45. And the fire, of course, was already too intense by that time to save anything. Lawson himself was on a trip to Wichita to pick up a new airplane. His first glimpse of anything wrong was on his approach to land on Sunday morning. He looks down and the hangar's gone. Included in some of the stuff lost there was a Travel Air biplane that had been purchased 1 week earlier. It was valued at over $10,000. A $2,000 or $3,000 command airplane. Lawson had a standard J1 in there that was lost, and about $25,000 worth of other stuff, including a car, a boat, a glider, and some other tools and shop equipment. So for the second time in less than 10 years, we've kind of wiped out the Ark City aviation industry. Without that hangar, you don't operate very well. So through the 1930s, there were some meager efforts to reestablish a municipal field, but eventually the story actually turns to what we now know as Strother Field in the late 30s, when Arch City and Winfield decide to develop a municipal field for the two of them in one location. Of course, that's a whole different story, really. So the Army, of course, was deeply involved in the Strother effort, but I think one of the things that we can take from the 20s and early 30s effort was that the good old boy system of Army pilots that knew each other from their service days probably had a lot to do with what happened in Arch City through that period. But we can take away that Arch City was definitely early in the aviation game. It wasn't just watching, it was doing things. It contracted exhibitions, built infrastructure, recruited industry, hosted military route scouts, trained pilots, and even, as we've mentioned, housed nationally famous aircraft. But it learned a hard truth that aviation is a fragile industry, or at least it certainly was at that time, not only in the air, but on the ground. So, remember that first plane that was supposed to fly into Arch City way back in 1912? We're going to wrap this up with a video of that event. Not really. But what we've got here is a video clip that was shot several years ago, and it's an original 1909 Blériot 11, which is almost identical to that plane that would have flown into Arch City and eventually did fly the exhibition events around the city. The plane has no ailerons, for those of you that are nerds. To roll the airplane, the wings are warped. That's why all the guy wires on the wing. When he activates the stick side to side, it actually warps the wings to cause the plane to roll. We're a little crude. Anyway, back to the story here. Years after that event, it was kind of summed up in a traveler, and I've been unable to find this quote firsthand, but in a 1971 traveler, the traveler quoted itself and was recalling the 1912 exhibition and said that some person had found this quote in an earlier traveler and didn't give a date, which makes it a little hard to pin down. But I also did extensive searches based on the verbiage here, and I couldn't find it in the old travelers. But I think it's quite appropriate. And the quote goes like this: "They came and watched the fragile plane sputter, flutter, then ascend, circle, then descend. Then they left rather silently, feeling perhaps, and rightly, that their world would never be the same." And that's Arch City's Roaring 20s history. And I might add that I had a second equally original subtitle. Instead of Roaring Through the 20s, it was A Tale of Two Hangers. I decided that the Roaring Through the 20s was best. Anyway, I thank you for your attention.
an Arkansas City High School graduate, so I can't expect too much. If you need another Gary fix, however, Gary will be presenting a program at noon on Thursday, March 19th, down at the Cherokee Shrimp Museum in their Lunch and Learn program on stratigraphy. And so he's got a lot on that too, and does a very good job at all that too. Well, let's take about a 15-minute break, get some drinks, cookies, visit the table over here to see the ladies, and get your books if you don't have one yet, whatever else you have. Come talk to Tabitha, I'll talk to Ken. He's looking lonely over there. Take about 15 minutes, and then we'll get the last program. Our next presentation is a paper about a subject that I find to be one of the most really interesting events and occurrences to involve all of Cowley County and especially of Winfield. When this presenter first mentioned it to me a few years ago, he got to write a paper about it so we could include that in today's program. Well, like most of us, it took him a while, but he finally did get it done, and I was very glad to see it because to me it's one of the most intriguing topics that we've ever presented here, largely because it involves military intrigue, and above and beyond that, though, involving the way intertwined involves two of Winfield's most prominent and well-known families all came together in regard to this particular program. And so I'm so very pleased that we have Chris Jarvis here to present the program about the paper he had written on Operation Rusty. Let him explain all of that.
Well, thank you. That's quite an introduction. This presentation is not going to be as long because the subject matter didn't last as long. This is about Lovell Swain Stuber, who was a Winfield boy, grew up in the Stuber family. I'll move this a little closer. The Stuber family was a very prominent family in Winfield. There were, Lovell had 5 stepbrothers, 1 stepsister, and 1 full brother. So he was born in 1917. His father was James Philip Stuber, and his mother was Mary Margaret Swain. James Phillips' first wife was Louisa Groom, so that's where the Grooms and the Stubers all kind of tie together. And then Louisa died, he married Mary Margaret Swain, and had Lovell Swain. In 1917, was born in Wilmette, and grew up in Winfield, went to high school in Winfield, participated in sports, was an excellent student, and eventually joined the military. So the Stuber family was kind of an interesting family. They were all very, very tight. And unfortunately, there aren't very many Stubers in the area now, but there are a lot of people related to the Stubers in the area. They sold farm equipment and automobiles, and probably anything else they could sell if they could figure out a way to make a buck on it. But their primary business was the Ford dealership. So the first Ford dealership was actually in what now is the Chamber of Commerce building, where they worked for, the records are really sketchy, but for quite a few years. And there's an interesting way that they did these automobiles back in the old days. You know, the old Model Ts didn't weigh anything. And so when they wanted to work on them, they drive them into the back door of what is now the Chamber of Commerce, and there's an elevator there. They drive them onto the elevator, take them up to the 2nd floor, drive them off on the 2nd floor, and they do all the work on them upstairs, and the showroom was downstairs. A little different way than we operate today. But space was at a premium, and so they used every inch of space that they could. Later on, they built a brand new modern building which is now where Community National Bank is. It used to be Dillon's, and then it was Locke's and so forth. But they built that building and operated until they closed. When they closed, they sold the business to Klein's, and then Klein's moved the business further south. So it was a very industrious group. Lovell, it was sort of interesting. Lovell's oldest brother, Lovell was born in 1917. His oldest brother was born in 1880. So there's a 37-year difference between the oldest one and the youngest one. Families went on a long time back. It took 2 wives to do it, but they got there. So I can't imagine what it was like for him having a brother who was probably more like a father to him. But there was a lot of that had happened in those days. You needed a lot of kids to keep everything going. And so Lovell grew up in a large family that had a lot of dynamics going on and was very involved in the city of Winfield. So Lovell graduated from Winfield High School. He was a really good student. He attended Southwestern College and decided to join the military. And I'm going to try and figure out how this works because Gary told me this works perfectly every time. So there's a picture of Lovell in the Southwestern yearbook. This was before he got his nose smashed. He loved to box. And so later pictures that you see of him, his nose is kind of flattened. It didn't seem to bother him at all, but he was not only a good student, he really thought boxing was great. So, let me get the right button here. There's a picture of him with his nose slightly flattened in his military uniform. But that was taken on March 1st, 1942, just before his true story started. So Lovell went to Randolph Field in Texas and got his pilot's wings there and graduated with 2 other guys that there's a picture of in the newspaper talking about how they were going to be able to go out and fly anything that they wanted to fly after they got out of flight school. And to a certain extent, that's kind of what they did. So, let's see here. So, he married my mother on June 2nd, 1940. They were married in Sedgwick, and Lovell then went to Washington, D.C., where he was stationed in. So, they were a happy couple. Lovell was fairly high up in the military at that point in time. And so my brother, who is Lovell Swain Stuber II, was born on June 18th, 1941. So, an interesting story. Whenever I'm with my brother, since he's named Lovell Swain Stuber II, they wanted to be cute and come up with a nickname for him. So they called him Two, but they spelled it T-U. And he has had to live with that his entire life. So anytime he would meet somebody, he would say, "Hi, my name is Two Jarvis." He says, "T-U, it's a nickname." You know, and he had this line down so where every time he met somebody, he just got it out of the way all at once. So when I talk about Lovell, my brother, a lot of people have no idea who I'm talking about, but when I say Two, everybody understands. So as it turned out, it worked out pretty well. So they moved to Washington, D.C., and then World War II started. So I'm going to apologize. This talk's going to be a little shorter than some of the others because Lovell's life was a little bit shorter. But I think it's an important story, and it's a fun story for the people of Winfield because this is a Winfield boy that went on to do some extraordinary things. So, has anybody watched Masters of the Air, the TV series? If you haven't, I would encourage you to do so. I can't remember. I think it's on Apple, but I'm about the B-17 bombers in England flying over and bombing Germany. And you don't get a very good feel for how small those things are until you watch something like Masters of the Air. A B-17 at the time was a huge plane. By today's standards, it's not very big at all. You could put 3 707s, or put 3 of them into a 707. They were just not very big. So everything was very cramped, but very sturdy. And so the B-17 was the primary bomber of the United States at the start of World War II. So at the start of World War II, the military powers realized that they had a problem. They had to figure out how to get into Europe, and they didn't have, the Germans were sinking hundreds of boats that were trying to cross the Atlantic. The U-boats were just fierce out there. There's another movie about that that's also very interesting. And so getting material across to England, which would have been our stepping off spot there, was difficult. So they decided that maybe there ought to be a different way to go. So they decided maybe they would try to figure out a way to come across the Mediterranean and come up through Italy. And so they really didn't have much of an idea of what all was involved. So they decided that what they needed to do was fly planes over and map North Africa, figure out where a logical stepping off point would be so that they could then leave from there and fly north. So Lovell and another pilot were commissioned to fly modified B-17s from the United States over to North Africa with no armament, nothing but lots of cameras. So they sent the planes to United Airlines, which was in Cheyenne, Wyoming at the time, to be retrofitted. And by retrofitting, that meant throwing everything that was in them out to get them light. So they had done that previously with a B-17. A B-17 had gone from the United States and overflown Japan early on to try to get an idea of what all was out there. So United Airlines put 2 of these planes. The first one was the one that flew over Japan, and then they took a second one and did the same thing. They tried to pull anything that was heavy out of them so they could put in these massive cameras. So the planes flew with basically nothing but cameras and fuel. So I think I've got a picture here. There's a picture of Lovell with us. That's when he graduated Randolph Field. And that's what the B-17 looks like. In your book, if you bought one, there's a description of how they painted the planes. They had a special paint process so that they could fly, hopefully, and not be seen from the ground. So they had a multi-level process to try and paint them and get them ready to fly. So the B-17 looks like a big plane, but it wasn't very big. Not by today's standards. So this is a picture of the nose of the plane, and in the nose you can see the camera sticking out. They had lots of magazines, and I will tell you, it's also interesting that you can see the little sign on the front that says "Don't talk." Secrecy was important back then. They didn't want anybody knowing what was going on. So they put Fairchild K-17 cameras in. If anybody's a camera buff, maybe you know what that is. But they used film magazines that were these great big magazines that they would put in, take all the pictures, yank one out, and stick another one in. And so the plane was modified to hold 24 of those film magazines, which were, back in those days, pretty massive. They got the planes light enough that they could fly to 30,000 feet, which early in the war was higher than most fighter planes could get. Later in the war, they were surpassing that pretty easily. But early in the war, they were hoping to get up high enough that a fighter plane couldn't intercept them. So they got these planes put together and got ready for this secret mission. One of the things that's interesting about the secret mission, it was called Operation Rusty. And it wasn't declassified for some reason until 2015, so I couldn't have made this talk 10 years ago because we didn't have the information. I don't know what was so important about it that it took that long to declassify it, but the military works in strange ways. I think they probably just forgot about it. So they got 24 type A5A film magazines built into the instrument panel, and then they had 12 more back in the back. So that's what the places that they built look like, where they actually held the magazine. So you can see you almost can't get from the front to the back of the airplane. There's a way to get there, but you had to be 20. It was a really tight fit, and there was not much room in those airplanes, and they used up every inch of square space that they could to try to have enough room to put all these magazines in. So they took out the bomb side, they took out everything. So Operation Rusty was really interesting to me because of the two people that were involved in it. They had two pilots. Lovell at that time was a captain, and then they had a captain in the other plane. The mission was actually put together by the navigator in the other plane, who had some pull in Washington, and they decided they would fly and they would map North Africa. The navigator in the other plane was Kermit Roosevelt, which was President Roosevelt's son. And that's how they got the permission to try and do this flight over to North Africa. So they loaded up these planes, and they had, there's how you can, that's the inside of the plane, so you can see getting from the front to the back was not particularly easy. There's a picture of one of the cameras. They were great, big, massive things that took automatic pictures. Once you fired them up, they would start taking pictures at a predetermined rate. And everything was they got it all stuck in there, but I think there was a lot of duct tape and super glue involved to get everything to fit, because this was done in a big hurry. There's another picture of some of the cameras and the area that was in. That's next to what used to be the navigator's seat. There's some of the film cassettes that they had that were ready to be stuck into the cameras. The other thing they did was when they took out all the bombs and the guns and all that, they added something else. They added gas tanks. They had to have a lot of gas tanks, and so this is a picture of one of the gas tanks, and they used up every square foot of that plane to either carry cameras, gas, or people. There were 6 people on the plane, and then the rest of it was either cameras or gasoline. So there's a couple more gas tanks that they stuck in places that you aren't supposed to have gas tanks. There's 2 more big gas tanks. And there's another picture of another camera that they did. And so you can see it was really cramped. It's not like the planes that you see today. The B-17 was a really small airplane. and they really had to stuff stuff in there to get it to work. That's what it looked like underneath side. So they put the cameras, they cut holes in the plane, tried to cover them up so that it was somewhat aerodynamic, but that it would still be able to take pictures. So they had some clear plexiglass over it. 4 of the cameras were just left out in the open so that there wouldn't be anything in the way. So, the special flight took off from Puerto Rico. Lovell was in the first plane, and tail number 38-223. So he left from Warrenkeene Field, which is today Ramey Air Force Base in Puerto Rico, and he was going to fly to Trinidad, and he disappeared. Nobody ever knows what happened to it. He may have flown into the mountains in Venezuela. He was trying to get to Guyana, which is down in the lower right-hand corner. But communications were really sketchy at the time. So where that little pin is where their last communication was from. The problem was basically what Lovell was flying was a bomb. I mean, it was gasoline and cameras, and so nobody knows what really happened. And we always hold out the hope that someday they'll find the remains and we can at least find out what happened. But it may have been blown to smithereens. Nobody really knows for sure. So there were 2 Kansans on there. One was from Kansas City, Raymond Tucker. A guy from Maryland, a guy from Indiana, and one from D.C. So, needless to say, when my mom got the message, she was devastated, and again, nobody knew what happened. It was a secret mission, and she lived with that for the rest of her life. She just knew that he took off and never ever came back. That wasn't the only person that happened to, but for our family, that was a big deal because it was more personal to us. So I will give credit to the Stubers. Mom got a new car every year, a new Ford. The brothers took really good care of her, but she had a hard time with that for a long time. Then after the war, my mom married my dad, Lawrence Jarvis, and had me and Becky, and so my brother's 7 years older than I am, but he never really knew his dad. He was only, I think, 6 months old when his dad died. So the other fun part of the story is the second aircraft with Kermit Roosevelt on it made it down to Brazil, then made it across in April of '42, and they mapped all of North Africa. They came back and reported that they had hundreds of plates. So the plates were what they were taking the pictures on. And they mapped that entire North African continent. However, the plane didn't do so well. They had some planes try to come up and shoot them down. They flew in some rough weather. And again, the planes were kind of stuck together with super glue and duct tape. Well, they didn't have either one of those things then. I'm not sure what they stuck them together with, but it wasn't very good. And they had 18,000 plates. When they came back and landed the final time, one engine almost dropped off. It was hanging by one bolt. So it was a rough mission. But it got the entire north end of Africa mapped, and it gave us a place, to fight Rommel. We had way better intelligence on what was going on in the tank industry, so we could fight Rommel better. And we actually did send some troops through there, but eventually most troops came through England. So So it was interesting. My mom still had a lot of friends. She was in D.C., had a lot of friends in the military. And the mission was, I'm sorry, I said Kermit Roosevelt. It was Elliott Roosevelt that actually did it. And he got together with George Marshall and Hap Arnold to put this whole project together. So it had some really high-ranking people in it trying to figure out a way, because this was important. We did not have an easy way into Europe at that time. So it was a really interesting mission. It was unfortunate for my mom's first husband, but he was one of those people who would get in a plane. He could absolutely fly anything. That whole, when they talk about the greatest generation, that's really what they were talking about. You had guys that get in a plane that was put together by people they didn't know in a timeline they couldn't meet, and they took off and flew that silly thing wherever it needed to go and tried to come back. So the Stuber brothers continued in Winfield for quite a while, but that part of the Stuber brothers ended. Lovell was 24 when he died, so pretty young. But that's an interesting story that we didn't know anything about until 2015, which was a long time to go without knowing anything. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I'm wondering if you have any information on what kind of flight suits they had, because 30,000, it would be double cold. I told you right here.
You're gonna speak up just a little bit.
I was wondering if you had any information. Did they have special flight suits? You know, the bomber crews wore, sheepskin coveralls, if you will, and for managing 30,000 feet over a long period of time, they had to at least have that, maybe something better.
I don't know whether in 42 they had them. By about 43 or 44, they had suits that were electric. You could plug in.
They added that to the...
And I don't know whether Lovell had that or whether they... And, on the first leg of the trip and maybe flying across the Atlantic, they probably didn't fly at 30,000 feet.
Right.
But, yeah, again, if you watch Masters of the Air, there are some real graphic scenes where something bad happens to a plane at that height, and you see how quickly people inside froze. It was really, really an interesting experience for me, especially knowing what I know about B-17s.
They may very well have prototypes of the electric suits that the bomber crews got later. They were able to fly get a little bit cold out of
You had a question?
Yeah, so you said this wasn't classified till 2015, but what were you even told kind of growing up? That your mother had a first husband and he just disappeared? I mean, what were you told as a child?
We were told he was lost in the Bermuda Triangle. Literally, and that's all we knew. My brother's godfather was a general in Washington, D.C. He knew nothing. They knew that the last radio transmission came from that pin, and that was the last they heard. Nobody knew anything. And I think that's part of the hard part. And like I say, my mom wasn't the only person who that happened to. It just impacted us because it was us. But there were stories like that all through world wars anyway. But the impact of it was pretty decisive for my mother for a long, well, up until the day she died. It was still one of those things that she was always wondering. Yes, sir.
I graduated with 2, and I always thought that was his name.
His real name?
Yeah.
Yeah. His real name is Lovell Swain Stuber II, but to avoid confusion, they just named him two. And in some ways it was difficult for him. It was probably a real bonus for him because everybody remembers it. It's, you know, everybody would call him Three. That, you know, he had all kinds of nicknames. But it was sort of interesting. That's kind of the story of Lovell and that part of the Stuber family. The Stuber family itself is fascinating. They did so much for Winfield in those early days, from the 1820s through the 1850s. How many people are related to the Stubers in this room? Is there anybody in here? Yeah. David Lovell is here, and David, if you would like to talk a little bit about it, David is very closely related to the Stubers.
Yeah, all of my relatives and I have gone round and round and round because it's a very complicated story. As Chris said, J.P. Stuber, who had farms out there by Prairie View Church, where my great-grandfather had farms, Adam O. Wellfeld. And so J.P. had 6 or 7 children, including the twins, Ray and Ralph. That's who had Stuber Brothers Ford and the farmers and whatnot. Well, they had a sister who was Anna. No, gotta back up. So where it gets confusing. My grandmother, whose maiden name was Sloan, had a sister named Anna who married Ralph Stuber. So they were aunt and uncle to my dad. And then, so when we started diving into this whole thing, we're like, wait a minute, time out. Lovell, those were stepbrothers to Lovell. And we realized, well, we're not blood connected, but we are back through the Stuber name, through Ralph Stuber. Anyhow, it's rather complicated. The rest of them are all buried out there at the Wilmot Cemetery, where my great-grandparents are buried out there too. So, you want to?
So where does Joe Stuber fit in?
Well, so Joe was a son of Ralph. So they had. Hope I can get through these all correctly. I'm trying to think of the oldest daughter. It'll hit me. But there was Joe. There was Eleanor Louise, who went by Dutchie. A lot of people remember Dutchie Ewell.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so she was a sister to Joe Stuber. And trying to think the other ones now. So then Sarah Stuber Young, who was married Ted Young, the doctor. And who am I missing? I'm missing somebody else in there. There's Joe, Sarah, Dutchie. I'm missing one. Sorry, I can look it up. But anyhow, that's how they're all. And those were all the children of Ralph and Anna Stuber, right? And they were all my dad's first cousins then. So anyhow. Yeah. So I'm trying to remember which one of the Stuber brothers died early. I think Ray lived a long time. Ralph died early. And Anna died even earlier. She was in very poor health. And died probably about the time I was born, early 50s, I think. So, Mildred. Yes. There you go. Okay. Okay, yeah. Anyhow, it's a real convoluted story, but it's very interesting.
If anybody wants to know, I brought my brain with me. And, I'll be more than happy to kind of go through the Stuber side of it. Unfortunately, I was so young, I didn't know those people very well. We had grandmother Stuber, who was Lovell's mom, my first Lovell's mom, not my brother's. And she would come over for Christmas, and it was the most frustrating thing in the world because Becky and I were 6 and 8, something like that. Becky's older. And we couldn't go in and open up Christmas presents until Grandmother Stuber had gotten to the house and had eaten breakfast with us all. I mean, it was just horrible. One fun story about Ray Stuber, and if you get a chance, there are some great stories on Facebook. And if you aren't involved in Facebook, I would encourage you to at least look. Gloria has put a lot of stuff in there. Bill Bodorf's over here and has done an incredible amount of work on that. And now the museum has all of that available. There are some fun stories. And I was leafing through there a couple of days ago, and there was a person who had posted in 1941. He was digging through some stuff, and he found his dad's driver's license from 1941. And back in those days, the car dealership issued the driver's licenses, which is kind of an unusual thing. And so to get a driver's license, you had to be 16. And so his dad went down and got a driver's license. He was large for his age. He got his driver's license when he was 12 and lied and told him he was 16. So he got his driver's license at age 12. And Ray Stuber signed the driver's license. So there are so many fun stories on there. If you get a chance, go to the museum's website. The museum has links to most of Bill's stuff. And Gloria has done a ton of work. You'll know if you're from Winfield. And there's 4 or 5 Facebook groups with lots of fun pictures. So I would encourage you to do that. It's a really great resource. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Sharon and Gary, come back up here too. We need to see if, as I said, that got done. If anybody has any questions for the other presenters, why, now's the time.